I want to welcome every single one of you who took the time to join us tonight. It clearly, it clearly shows that you're taking yourself seriously and really trying to enhance the experience and trying to do everything in our part, so that we can really make the process of, shidduchim a little bit easier, and let Hashem do the rest. We're very honored. First of all, I want to welcome, my name is Yehudas Blooming, from North Carolina, and we're very honored to have with us today Dr. Ives, who has been a coach, a shidduch coach and a doctor specifically in this area of relationships. He's written many books. He actually just put together a website now called datewell.org. Hours and hours, hundreds of hours of knowledge and wealth. I can't even begin. I was going through it, and it can burst your brains of how much knowledge he put in trying to share all of the knowledge that he has and that he has invested in learning about relationships and dating, and trying just to help us in every way possible to give us the tools that we can have to make the process as sensitive and as productive as possible. So we understand that, everyone here is with so much love, that we're with family and friends, and it takes a village to make something happen. And it's really, we're all in this together. And the hope is that when we all can gain a little bit more insight and a little bit more knowledge and a little bit more of hope and inspiration and cheering each other on, then Hashem should see that we're doing our part, and Emerz Hashem, everyone should be able to see the revealed brachas in their life, and and get to the chuppah in the most seamless way possible. So with that, we're very honored, Dr. Yossi Ives, to be with us and share with us some of his tips of, dating and the little pitfalls that people might fall into, and the ups that we can pull ourselves out of. And sometimes, we can spin in a loop and help us get out of that, perhaps. And so with that, Doctor, please take it away. And we're looking forward to hearing from you tonight.
So I'm going to launch in, and I understand it's a little difficult to have everybody directly involved, but we have a chat bar, and anybody who would like to raise any questions, I very much encourage it. I'm sure that the last thing people want to hear is an hour-long monologue from a middle-aged guy. So the way I'll start is by presenting three main conceptual ideas, which I hope you won't think are completely obvious, and I'm definitely not trying to insult your intelligence. So point number one, and maybe this is the most important thing I can share with you, so if you get cut off the middle, if you've heard this, you've heard the most important thing. If things aren't working out, ask why. This isn't to imply that there's something majorly wrong or there's something that a person needs to change in some dramatic fashion, but it is reasonable in any aspect of life that if something isn't going the way one would have hoped, significantly so, then that's a good reason to stop and say, before I continue down this road, putting more effort in, more time, more money, let's try to see if we can understand what's going on. In other words, what could I know that I don't already know, or what could I understand that I don't already understand, which if I did, that could make a difference in what choices I make, in how I react to things, in the kind of decisions that I may take going forward. So I came up with a little quote that I made up myself, which goes like this: if your dating isn't going to plan, ask yourself just one question. What could I understand better about myself that would make the difference? And another one, you don't need to change yourself to succeed in dating, just learn to be yourself a little more effectively. So to set out these main ideas, I'm going to go with the model of bad news and good news. So the bad news is that you can't change. People are what they are for the most part. And if anybody tells you that the solution to you finding a shidduch is to be somebody you're not, then they're misleading you. And they're misleading you in two ways. One way, it's not true, you don't need to be. And number two, you cannot be. You don't have the ability to turn yourself into somebody you're not. And if you're able to, you need to be in Hollywood. You're clearly a talent. and somebody should be paying a lot of money for it. So the bad news is you cannot change. The good news is you do not need to change. This is a myth. There isn't some way that if only I would be somebody new, somebody different, somebody better, things would go easier for me. People, whoever they are, whatever type of personality they have, including many significant limitations, have been able to get married, and I'm proof of that. So I want people to know that when I ask them to ask the question of themselves, what is it that's going on here? Why is it this is proving to be a much bigger headache than I thought it would be? This isn't to imply in any which way that there's some imperfection, there's some kind of fundamental fault and you need to fix yourself. No, we're saying be aware so that you can then make certain small adjustments to how you do things now that you know what you know. The best way to understand it is that if I ask you to make your way from one end of a room to another with many sort of sharp objects strewn over the room and where the possibility of you getting hurt is enormously high, the way you could possibly do that is by trying to remove all the obstacles from the room, and then you can make your way across. That is, of course, extremely difficult and may not even be possible. But if all you did was you switched on the light, now you can see where the obstacles are and you can make your way around them. Nothing has changed, but your awareness of what's going on, what you may want to call situational awareness, has been transformed. Now, as we get through this, I'll give some examples and make this more concrete. What are the kind of things which may be that somebody's not aware of? But I just want you to, for the moment, just bear with me and trust me for the next 5 minutes, that there are numerous things that people could be absolutely unaware of. They're small, they don't require you to change who you are, but they are causing real harm. They're getting in the way, they're making life much more difficult, and it doesn't make sense for us to ignore them. Second introductory point. It's all in the partnership. There's this idea that you're looking for somebody, some person with certain qualities which you find attractive and desirable and maybe admirable. And you believe that if you were with that kind of person, you would have what you want. That ignores the simple fact that we're not looking here for a person, let's say, to hire. We're looking to be in a relationship. So you can have a good guy and a good girl, a good boy and a good girl, and they're both wonderful, but together they just don't do it. And this is something which is kind of obvious, but it's sometimes overlooked. And what happens is when a person realizes this simple truth, they may be able to come to a point where they can appreciate the person that they're looking for, maybe somebody that objectively they admire, but doesn't work for them. And unfortunately, I've watched people spend 2 decades resisting that simple point and refusing to open their mind to the possibility that what they're looking for is something they do genuinely find appealing, but it doesn't actually work for them in practice. The relationship is more important than the two individuals alone. It's what happens between the two that is so important. So I've got a quote here, which again I came up with. A great shidduch is less about matching up two great people, but more about matching up a great couple. It's all in the relationship between the two. And so let's just unpack this for another minute. It is true, scientifically, there is mountains of evidence that similarity between two people is a great basis for a shidduch. There's no question about it, but both in dating and in marriage, the more that people are similar means the more they're going to pull in the same direction, the more they're going to appreciate about each other, and the less reason there is for that marriage to be strained. But there is one massive exception to this rule. And here's a quote on this. When it comes to dating, similarity between the two people is a clear advantage, with one exception: personality. When it comes to personality, similarity is very often a massive disadvantage. And it is amazing how little understood this is, but it is also absolutely true. For example, if somebody is strong-minded and opinionated and forceful, and let's say the person is female and doesn't feel that she wants to marry somebody who she's going to walk all over, So she looks for somebody who's also strong-minded and opinionated, perhaps even more strong-minded and opinionated than she is, so that she's going to feel she can respect her husband and that she's not going to feel that she's tempted to kind of overwhelm him. She may even have many cases where she went on dates with people who are weaker personalities and it didn't work out. And so she's now got tremendous proof, quote unquote, for her case. Unfortunately, it's not true, and her proof is not proof at all. The reality is that many people are working on an unquestioned assumption that a certain type of personality would work for them because it kind of makes sense and it's kind of what they think they want, but it's quite obvious that it's not working. And the reason why it's not working is because it would never work, because it's not a good idea. It really is not smart, and be much better to reevaluate and to ask yourself, okay, whatever I was thinking isn't doing the trick, so what should I do instead? So here again, the bad news and the good news. The bad news, you may feel frustrated in the dating. Some people will find dating frustrating. It's not easy for them. But the good news is your marriage can still be great. It is really something you have to be aware of. If you can have a beautiful, pleasant, exciting, rewarding, smooth dating process, well, that is amazing. I wish that for everybody. Why should anybody go through stress and aggravation? But it's more important that you have a 50-year-long wonderful marriage. And that may not necessarily be reflected in the dating. Please understand that dating is an incredibly fake environment. Two complete strangers are expected to within a very short space of time, start talking for hours about themselves, revealing all kinds of personal information. This is nothing like you've ever done before, and it doesn't always end up being an easy experience. That has often got nothing to do with the quality of the relationship, the potential of the shidduch, but people think that it has, and therefore feel discouraged by it because the dating is not easy, thinking that must mean there's something wrong with the shidduch. It could be, but it often is not. And one has to be aware that that can be a reason why we keep rejecting or keep being rejected by people, because we are not experiencing the dating in such a positive way, even though it could easily turn out to be a good marriage. Introductory point number 3. Don't settle for second best. If anybody tells you, well, you're already this age, or you've seen how difficult it's been, or you've had many rejections, and so maybe you ought to settle for second best, maybe you ought to just lower your standards. That is not true. You should never, ever even, if somebody tells you that, maybe you need to speak to other people. I find it incredibly disheartening and disconcerting when people think that it's for them to tell other people what expectations they should have out of life. So 100% want you to know that you have the total right to the kind of person that you're looking to marry, and nobody should be telling you that you should give that up. However, you do need to have your priorities straight. And as we said earlier, dating is not marriage. And you need to ask yourself, what are the qualities that you will actually need in a marriage? And here are a couple of quotes that I made up to illustrate my point. Remember your priorities when you are dating, as your priorities are very unlikely to forget you. What this means is that if people don't give the proper place for the things which are truly important, they're not going to be less important just because we chose to ignore them. And the second one, it is reasonable to want to be both happy and right, only that sometimes you only get to choose one. Choose happy. What this means is that settling for second best does not mean that every single mishigas that never makes sense in the first place is something you should dig your heels in and never give up on. Sometimes there are ideas that we have, things that we would like, which truthfully, when they're scrutinized in the cold light of day, don't make a whole lot of sense. They aren't actually important. They're not going to contribute in any meaningful way to our overall success in marriage. And sometimes this isn't about settling for second best. This is about focusing what really matters. So the good news and the bad news. The good news, you don't have to and shouldn't compromise on your priorities. The bad news, I hope you don't mind me saying it this way, it usually doesn't work to hold on to dumb priorities. So those are my introductory comments, and I will come back to this last one because it's one of the questions that was asked of me to address tonight. I haven't noticed at the moment any kind of strong reactions on the chat, so I'll assume that I've survived this part of the presentation. So I can already start breathing a little easier. So let me now give you some illustrations, just random examples, the kind of things that people can get stuck on and may not realize. And it sounds crazy because these are such crippling things, but from my experience, I've almost never come across somebody who's approached me and then they told me, oh, I knew that, that's something obvious, I've dealt with it already. So it seems like we have the ability to be unaware of certain really significant things that are going on in our dating. So in no particular order and for no particular reason, here are some examples. Conflicting interests. Conflicting interests can come in many different forms, and I'm not going to cover everything. But just to illustrate, you could have somebody who's a bit more complex and has two sides to their character. And maybe one side to their character is more fun-loving, and one side to their character is perhaps more serious. They don't realize, they just think of themselves, that's just me. But they are actually not just me. There's basically you and you. There are two people basically living in the same body. Both of them show up on a single date, and the person coming on the date is actually dating two people and doesn't realize it. Or maybe they do, which is why they're struggling. But two people show up effectively in the same body, two minds in the same head, and they're wanting different things. And clearly, whichever side is lucky to have a person compatible on that date, the other side of them is going to be in full revolt because this person is not what they're looking for. And what can happen sometimes is that people will go from one side to the other. So they'll be dating somebody who's on the more serious side. Serious could be in terms of Hasidishkeit or just in general in terms of their personality, because that's the kind of person they respect, maybe the kind of upbringing they have, the parents they have. But then they find it too uninspiring, and so they end up dating somebody way on the other side of the spectrum, but that doesn't suit the part of them that really wants somebody they see as more of a so-called marriage material. And this can go on and on and on. And so it's important to recognize that nobody is really just a totally unitary entity. Nobody's just one very straightforward, or almost nobody, one very straightforward person. We all are made up of different parts of our character. You'll even see certain people who may be normally very quiet, but you put them on a stage and they can become very alive. And you have many types of things like this. I've seen people who in the classroom, they're like a powerhouse, but you would never know that if you saw them in the street. So people do have different parts of their character. With some people, those parts are more divergent than others, meaning the gap between the two sides of their character can be quite significant. And the kind of person that they would choose to marry or they would be comfortable dating could be quite different, except that they're not able to resolve this problem on a single date, because whoever they're dating is very unlikely to be able to satisfy both sides of their character. And this is something that people are mostly, from what I've seen, not aware of. And it comes to them as a great shock. But it's something which goes on, and it goes on a lot. And I'd say maybe as much as 5% of people struggling with shidduchim, it's because of this. And that's a big number. So it's something to ask yourself. Is it, if I'm always unhappy with the person I'm dating, could it be because actually I'm a more complicated type of person and I need to figure out what I'm going to do? Of course, I could go into detail about what you do in situations like this, but for this segment, I'm really trying to just bring up some examples, maybe bring it somewhat to life. Another example of where people may get stuck, I call it being unconsciously self-absorbed. So let me just explain. When you're on a date, approximately 50% is the actual communication. The other 50% is what the person feels, which is not coming from your mouth, but is coming from the overall sort of, let's call it the dynamic between the two people. I have a word for it I made up called resonance. It's a bit like if you've ever been past a loudspeaker, maybe at a wedding or something, and you hear that pulsate, you feel that pulsation, that pulsating force coming from the speaker. There's a certain type of waves that we send out. They come out in a variety of ways about how the person sees us on the date. This is something which most people would not even think about, but it comes out in a variety of ways. You wouldn't know, by the way, but if you like somebody on a date, your eyes flicker twice the speed as if you don't. And although nobody's looking to see how many flickers you have per second, the reality is these are many of the ways that people pick up on somebody's reaction to them. And the same goes for body language, the same goes for the kind of compliments you would give or other things the person gets to see. And some people, because there's a lot going on inside of their head, they're more self-absorbed, not in a narcissistic way, purely because they're more anxious or because they're more fearful or there's something going on. They come to the date with a part of their mind preoccupied with whatever's going on inside of their head, all subconsciously, but it means that instead of applying themselves 100% to the date, there's always a part of them that's simply not being very present, and the other person will feel it. Now, this is something which can go on again for decades until people understand that they need to be more aware of this. They need to be able to articulate it to the person they're dating so that person understands what's happening, and they have to be able to compensate in some way so it doesn't become so obvious. So, for example, to be conscious to make compliments, to be conscious to lean forward and to be present and to try not be distracted and so on. But again, it sounds like this is an obvious thing. You come to a date, you pay attention. But the reality is that without you realizing it, because you don't even know to avoid it, you have a nature that means that half of your brain is taken up with thoughts about what you're doing and being self-conscious and being inconfident and all these sorts of things that will make a big difference to how you experience the date and how they experience the date. And then especially, if I had to tell you how many times people have said to me, I'm talking about hundreds now, I just don't feel a connection. We dated, everything was okay, but I just didn't feel a connection. That is coming often because of a lack of resonance. That lack of connection isn't because they're fundamentally incompatible, but because people want to feel a certain connection and they're not feeling it. And if that's the case, there are things we can do about it. I see there are some comments in the chat. Keep them coming. I will come to them in a few minutes. The third example I came up with relates to something we spoke about already earlier, which is judging a date by how much you enjoy it. I understand that it's absolutely normal for people to want to enjoy the date, for them to be excited about the date, for them to feel very comfortable and at ease. And it's completely reasonable. I'm not suggesting it's a bad idea to want that, but it sometimes isn't the way it's going to happen. And it's absolutely critical that if a person picks up on a pattern where they're just finding dates not easy, that is not necessarily a proof that there's something wrong with the person they're with. The basic correlation, if this person was somebody suitable for me, then I would feel more comfortable being here. I wouldn't be struggling as much. The person would bring me out of myself. All of this may be true, but it may also not be true. It totally depends on the person. And there's a whole cohort of people who, for a list of reasons, which I'm happy to give more examples of, may come to dating and just find it hard. They may, for example, just struggle to open up. There could be reasons for that. But if that's the case, they could easily be concluding that the date isn't working for them because of the things that they're struggling with, not necessarily because the date is unsuitable. And we could have saved literally thousands of shidduchim on this simple idea alone. Obviously, I'm not asking people to just assume that they're going to know without any way of thinking it through whether or not it is a problem with the shidduch or whether it's something to do with their character. But it is important that if this is something which keeps happening, that we don't assume that it's just the solution is to find somebody else to date. Sometimes we have to open ourselves up to the possibility that this is just how one experiences dating, and it's something one has to learn to deal with and to figure out how to deal with in the most effective way possible. And the final example is avoidance. Now, this is a topic which is very well covered in the literature, meaning we have probably over 200 studies, scientific studies on this. So we know with a great deal of confidence that there's approximately 5% of all people who will have some degree of avoidance. This means to say that while they want to get married, which is why they're dating and genuinely want to get married, they can still struggle when it comes to commitment. The more serious it gets, the harder they find it. Sounds absurd because it should be the other way around. The more the dating is progressing, the more you feel comfortable. And that's true for 95% of people. But there's a 5% of people who find this intimidating, who find it stressful, who find it anxiety inducing. And in extreme cases, which is under 1%, genuinely terrifying. Terrifying to an extent, in some cases, of becoming physically sick. And I mean literally bedridden, almost hospitalized. It is an overwhelming terror that takes over the person, that the person that they want to marry is somebody who they can't understand why. The way they see it is causing them to be so frightened. And of course, it's not the case. They have their own avoidance issue, which results in this very, very serious backlash. In many cases, very serious, in some cases more mild. And the person would have to conclude in their rational mind that if I'm feeling this uncomfortable with dating this person, if the thought of marrying this person is causing me to become so sick, it must be that this is a bad idea. It must be this shidduch is something is wrong. And the fact that I don't know what it is means maybe I just haven't figured it out. But my intuition is telling me something is wrong with the shidduch. And this is not likely to be the case. I would bet that 90-80% of the time, maybe it's close to 99.9% of the time, by the time you get to this point in the dating, you figured out whether the person is suitable or not. And so if you find that the person is causing you such fright at that point in the dating, it's most likely nothing to do with the other person and more likely to do with your own avoidance. And I've had many examples of this. I can tell you stories that people ask me to, where I've seen people going through years of failed shidduchim, nice people, like the most nice people you could imagine. And nobody could understand why they were struggling. But this was going on and on and on. And the people that were advising them, from Rabbanim to Mashpiyim to Shadchanim, and the list goes on, were not able to pick up on what seemed to be a fairly obvious thing. And this person is now happily married with 5 children. And the most wonderful marriage, and there was nothing wrong with the shidduch, but the person didn't understand what they were going through. So to close off this middle segment of the presentation, I really hope that people have got a sense, just from a few examples, the kind of reasons why people can get themselves into real bother. And if only we knew what was going on, we could say, oh, right, so that's what it is. Now, what do we do about it? It doesn't mean life is going to be simple, but at least we know what we're up against. And we know what the reality is. But otherwise, we can develop all kinds of completely delusional conceptions that detach from reality about why the shadchan keeps setting me up with the wrong people, or why the people I date don't know how to relate to me. And all of this could be true, but it may all be completely untrue. And it's important that we bracket this, means we put everything into kind of a question mark. 1 second, I've been dating now for a while, I've met a bunch of people, things have not been the way I thought. What does this mean? What would I want to take from this? Pause and reflect. Now, I've got a bunch of questions that people have submitted beforehand, which I'm happy to go through, but I'm just going to look at some of the comments in the chat here. What do you do when they just random people on street reference and not your real friends? I'm not sure exactly what this question means.
Saying what happens if you put the references down that you want to call, but they're called
Right.
other people.
So I'm just being told by somebody, namely my wife, that the question means if somebody finds that people are asking questions from people who are not down as official references. I'm not the expert at this, so I think there are others maybe who have a clearer opinions. I would say that there needs to be a kind of what I call a dating hygiene. One has to have clarity about how one does things, and not everything goes, and getting drawn into things that are not appropriate because other people have kind of decided that is not helpful. And I'll make a comment further about this relating to references, because somebody else submitted a question prior to this call. The next question is, how can one tell that after dating someone for over 7 times and see it doesn't work out, then date someone else with a completely different personality and is attracted to them? How do you know it's not a rebounding effect? The answer is not in theory, and I would encourage people not to try to jump to conclusions. You need to know the facts of the matter. You need to know yourself and what happened and what you're going through, and make your judgment accordingly. I would find the rebounding effect here to be an unlikely scenario, just doesn't resonate with me, but I'm not saying for sure this can't be the case. So let me go to some of the questions that were submitted, and I'll have a look again at the chat in a moment. Question number one is, many of us are so proficient in life, yet in this parasha, people are suggesting coaching or even therapy. Have you seen that being helpful? So I'm going to do this briefly. As was mentioned earlier, I have a website called datewell.org where you have a vast amount of information that you can get for free. There we cover this topic in detail, but here's the short version of it. Therapy and date and coaching are two very different things in my book. Therapy is where you go because you have a clear and obvious problem that you need to sort through so that you can date, so that you can move on with your life. An example would be if a person has an addiction or has been through a loss and is grieving and needs to process that so they can be emotionally healthy. There are many examples of a person has generalized anxiety disorder or has depression or any of these things. For people to ignore them is really foolish, and it's going to make dating way, way more difficult, in some cases impossible. So I'm not against therapy at all for people who have a clear need for it. But therapy is not the answer for dating problems. I've not had a single example where somebody's gone to therapy and it's helped them to solve their shidduch issues. These need to be resolved by speaking to people who understand what are the kind of issues that would crop up and be able to help a person to figure out super quickly what it is that may be getting in their way. And so just again, to summarize, if a person needs therapy and they don't go, that really is not a smart thing and it won't pay off. If you need it, you have to get it. But that's only with a clear purpose. You know why you're going. You don't go to a therapist and say, I need help because my shidduchim is not working out. Maybe you can help me. That is just not going to achieve anything, right? But if you have a specific issue, mental health issue, where you're just not coping with stress, and so you come to shidduchim and you're clearly not coping, that is something you need to go to therapy for. Where you could benefit from coaching is where you're beginning to recognize things are not adding up, and you would like to see how to get your head around it. What I would say to you is that there are two types of coaching. There's dating coaching, and there's relationship coaching. Dating coaching could be simply a case of, and we'll come to some examples later, improving your communication, becoming more presentable, touching up your profile, trying to have a sounding board to bounce ideas off, and so on. A relationship coach is somebody who's an expert on relationships and can help you psychologically figure out if there's something that's getting in your way that most likely a regular dating coach would not be expected to be able to figure out. I hope that answers the question. And I would say that, yes, for people who don't need therapy or don't need coaching, it's a total waste of money and time. But for people who do, absolutely, it's worth investing in, because this is an important aspect of life. And if it's not working without it, well, clearly it's worth trying to see what could happen with the help of an expert. Question number 2. I care deeply for my friend that seems to be struggling with shidduchim. How can I be a help and support? Well, whoever wrote this, I applaud it. It's great that you have friends like this, and kol hakavod. Others can give their comment, and we can, by all means, see what people are going to post on the chat. But here's what comes to my mind. Number 1, spread the word. I don't see how there could ever be a reason for people not to share somebody's profile, obviously in a discreet manner, not posting it on Facebook to the whole world, but to really make an effort to let people know that this is your friend, that you think highly of the person, you would like to see them get suggestions. Number 2, don't be afraid to make suggestions. It's terrifying, I get it, but we have to be brave. We have to be willing to, if we think of an idea, to say this to somebody and make sure somebody does something about it. Number 3, be inclusive. On a previous webinar organized by our dear host, this was a big point, and I want to lean into it. At the end of the day, people need to know that the other people have their back. It is a tremendous chizuk just knowing that you're not alone in this, and that other people care about you and invite you for Shabbos, and take time to go out with you for coffee. Just be there for the person. That is already a huge thing. Number 4, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, and please forgive me, but know what you don't know. You may be a very good friend, and God bless you for that, but it doesn't mean to say you're an expert on dating. And if somebody comes to you and is saying, what do I do here? If it's not something you really know about, then it's important that you're not being a friend by telling them whatever you think they want to hear. Just make sure you're not part of the problem. And number 5, finally, don't reinforce poor strategies. And again, I apologize if this sounds harsh, but what I found is that people speak to people and I've been given what seemed like well-meaning advice, but frankly, it's not correct. I'll give you just my favorite pet hate, which is this idea of taking a break, as if the solution to almost every shidduch problem is to take a break from the dating and that's somehow going to cure it. It almost never does. We can talk about why and what another time, but suffice it to say that not every solution is going to be taking a break, and we need to make sure that people aren't just being given advice that may, for whatever reason, be the best that they can offer, but actually there's no reason to believe is going to help them. Question number 3. So many are scared to settle. What does settle mean? So we touched upon this before, but this gives me an opportunity just to elaborate on one point which we didn't discuss. Settle means accepting something that is actually not in your best interest. I'm going to repeat that. Settle means accepting something that is actually not in your best interest. You're not settling when you decide to drop something which is not in your best interest. You're actually just acting smart and focusing on what's important. So I want to give you just an illustration of this. I was dealing with a 39-year-old woman, and I was trying to explain to her that whatever she was trying to do didn't really add up and wasn't going to work because it didn't make sense. And what I got back was this really strong reaction. I've waited 39 years to get married. I'm not going to drop my standards now. If I wanted to drop my standards, I could have done so 10 years ago. I have broad shoulders and I have to take it. But it's disappointing reaction and it's not correct. Just because you spend 39 years doing something dumb isn't a reason to continue for the next 39 years. And you're not settling. You're not settling when you come to a point where you're able to understand how something you genuinely thought would make you miserable actually won't. And it's not a bad idea and it can work out very well. And even though it feels a struggle, that's because certain aspects of our personality and our character, which we have to learn to handle and not let it sort of sabotage our happiness. Question number 4. What are steps for singles that we can encourage each other to get more active in the process? I don't know if that question was clear. I'll just explain. As I understand it, the questioner wants me to address how we can help those who are dating and those around them do more to take ownership and to increase the chance of a successful outcome. So I've come up with 10 points. People may want to write this down or I can post it later, but this is just my ideas. I'm sure others have their own. Number 1, create a great shidduch profile. There are some amazing shidduch profiles. I saw one. It just was so simple. The English was so plain, but it was just felt so authentic. And I really felt that I understood the person by reading it. Many shidduch profiles are bland and don't tell you anything. And it's a missed opportunity for a person to get across. Now, that's something which we can do, but it's also something which some people don't know how to do. And getting help from a friend or from somebody to do this is a big chesed and it can make a difference. Please remember the famous expression about first impressions. And for many people, the profile is their first impression. Number 2, great profile picture. I'm officially a camera phobe and avoid pictures to the absolute extent possible. But I understand that most shidduch profiles nowadays have pictures. And from what I can tell you, and I'm not going to post pictures here so people can see how terrible they are, many times, I would say most times, I end up asking the person to replace their picture. Occasionally, I get myself into trouble for telling them that, but the truth is the truth. So we need to be, asking a friend who's decent with a camera, can you take a picture? That means not a picture on a bad background or whatever. A great picture means in every way, it brings out the best in the person. Somebody who knows what that means doesn't need to explain it. And somebody who doesn't, I'm not going to be able to teach them. Number 3, support in looking the part. Again, maybe some people just responded with ouch at this point. I'm sorry, because I'm not looking to tread on toes, but I really do believe that people sometimes are going on a shidduch without getting a whole lot of advice about how to look the part. This is not only towards women. I've had men who have a battered hat or a torn jacket or a creased shirt. I don't know who's sending them on a shidduch like that. I think we need to understand that you're showing up for the first time or maybe for the second time. People are entitled to want to feel that you're taking it seriously and you're making an effort. And I think that as a friend and as ourselves, we could go and quite literally look in the mirror and say, okay, do I know my makeup? Do I have my hair right? Do I have a suitable pair of shoes? I know this sounds obvious, but from experience, this is not something that's always the case. Number 4, good date location suggestions. Some people are great, they know where to go, and other people, they get very predictable and they're not so good at it. Many shadchanim are brilliant at giving suggestions, and others, this is something where we can make an effort to get it better by coming up with really suitable places that suit the individual date, number, wherever it may be in the stage of dating. Number 5, and here's something which, if only this alone is dayenu for this call, lead more interesting / meaningful lives. This is so important. When you go on a date, you may not realize it, but you're actually wearing a placard around your neck that says, would you like to join my life? It's actually around your neck, even if you don't think it's there. And what is that life that you're inviting the person to join? And so we need to have meaningful, interesting lives so that when we go on a date, we are offering people an interesting and meaningful opportunity. And this means for each person according to where they're at in life. But for example, try a new dish, go to a new place, let's say a museum, open a new sefer, take on to do a new mitzvah. Just call up a relative you haven't spoken to in 5 years, or your uncle, your aunt or something. There's so many ways of just filling your life with good stuff that when you show up on the date, you're buzzing and you have good energy. This is beyond important. Number 6, practice questions and answers. Not everybody is a natural. Many people feel that they don't give full answers. They're somewhat monosyllabic, meaning it's yes, no, maybe, whatever. If somebody's doesn't feel that that's a strong point for them, then they should be able to find somebody, hopefully, who they can practice with, become a little more proficient in their communication. Number 7, coordinate regarding references. I don't even want to give names over here, but my own family members is a bit embarrassing. But I called up references and they had no idea they were even a reference. And the last time they'd spoken to the person was 4 years ago. And they had no idea they were even listed. So making an effort to speak to your references and make sure they know that they're a reference and to coordinate with them what they're going to say, not to control every word, but to establish basic information. They may not know you've changed jobs. They may not know what's gone on in the past 2 years since you had any meaningful connection to them. Number 8, encourage help seeking if appropriate. When not everybody needs to get help. I know in America we're addicted to self-help. I understand. That's not what I'm talking about. It's clear if someone is struggling, if they're trying hard and it's not working out, then who could possibly make a difference here? Number 9, help show a shadchan or an influencer appreciation. This could be you or it could be somebody else who just calls up the shadchan and says, I'm sending around a bunch of flowers. I so appreciate what you've been doing for Shayna. I so appreciate what you've been doing for David. you have to understand, I'm not a shadchan champion here. I'm not being asked to speak on their behalf. But the fact of the matter is, and shadchan, I don't mean a professional shadchan necessarily, anybody who's in that person's life in the shidduch space, who's making an effort, show them appreciation. They need motivation too. Do you know how difficult it is to stay motivated every day? So give them a reason to be motivated. And number 10, and finally, identify and work on improving an area of weakness. This relates to everything we've said so far. In other words, that if you know that it's been commented that you come across like you're not very passionate about things, everything's kind of half-hearted. They tell you like, he doesn't seem to care very much about things. You know, when you ask him what's important, then that's an area you can work on. How can you convey more conviction? Shidduchim's not a show, but the other person's come to get to know you. Don't make it harder than it has to be. Question number 5. How do I strengthen my simcha and bitachon during this time? So I'm not here as Rabbi Ives, although I do have that title and I am the Rav of a shul. I'm here officially as Dr. Ives. So I'm not going to preach to you about bitachon, but I'm going to say to you 2 things that you're not going to get anywhere else. You'll have to decide if that's because nobody else would say something so stupid, or whether you think that's because maybe there's something in what I'm saying. Number 1, bitachon is often treated as something abstract, separated from the dating process. It should be understood that if something is right but doesn't feel right, that is where bitachon comes in. So let me explain what I mean. Bitachon is often separated from the thing itself. So I do what I do, and in the back of my mind, whatever I have bitachon, that whatever it is going to work out. That is not how I see it when it comes to shidduch. I think we need to have an attitude towards bitachon where we, sorry, this is somebody calling on the phone. I should turn off the phone. That we are able to trust the process. So for example, if you've gone on 10 dates with somebody and everything lines up and you've really been critical in your thinking and you've looked at it with eyes wide open, and it does seem to be a really suitable shidduch, not just because the person has the qualities you appreciate, but more importantly, because it seems, as best you can tell, to be the right kind of person for you. And everything you know about marriage and about life tells you that this person would be the right kind of person for you to date, but you are struggling with it. Something about it is bothering you. Okay? That's where you need to have bitachon. Bitachon in Hashem, yes, but bitachon in Hashem is given as a process here that is designed to help us and not to become so untrusting that unless I feel 100% sure, I won't take risks. Unless I feel 100% comfortable, I'm not willing to believe the system is going to work out for me. I hope that's clear, that the shidduch system, I'm not claiming it's divinely ordained, but it's what we have, it's what's evolved over many, many generations, and it in many ways has some very brilliant aspects to it. It allows us to use our mind and also our heart to figure this out. And if at the end of the day, by the time we've gone through this process, it seems very clear that we've done it right, we haven't messed up on this, we haven't deliberately kind of ignored important things, we've been very open and honest, and we've taken advice, and at the end of the day, it seems the right thing, then you have to know that if it seems the right thing, and if as best what any human being can tell, it adds up, then you have to have the confidence, because in almost every scenario, you will not regret it. So one has to have a little bit of courage here, because for some people, there will always be that moment when they're going to have to take the plunge, where there isn't this euphoria, where they just are so enthralled by it that they don't have to really hold on tight and take a very difficult decision. And the second point about bitachon: trust that Hashem has his messengers and be ready to trust that they are themselves guided by a higher hand. I hope that's not too spiritual. I'm not trying to preach at all. I mean this in the most practical way from my many years of experience. There are good people out there. I sometimes told people who just can't make a decision, find 3 people you trust and have them make the decision. I've done this myself in so many ways and I've never been disappointed, right? You know, harbe shluchim lamokim. There are many, many people who the Eibishter chooses to be their messengers, and we need to open ourselves up to this. And if people tell us, people we trust and we think are smart, why are we then so reluctant to accept their advice? Again, I think you should choose very carefully who you ask. But I think, you know, sometimes you have a shadchan who's worked with you for many years and really knows you and is trying their best. We need to just work on the assumption that Eibishter wants that person to help us, and to be trusting that those people around us are actually not just acting entirely on their own, but they're getting a siyata dishmaya. And we need to believe that, because I've seen it over and over again. A final question on my list, and then I have a few minutes I can look at the questions on the chat. What if someone is engaged in a serious shidduch but is just not feeling it? This is such a common thing. People say, I'm just not feeling it. I know, everyone tells me she looks so great, he seems so wonderful, but I'm just not feeling it. This, if I had $1 for every time this was told to me, and I'm telling you hand on heart, I understand the dread. You're making the most important decision in your life, and you really cannot afford to get it wrong. And you just, something in your pit of your stomach just doesn't feel right. And you just, how am I supposed to do this? It's just not even possible for me to do this. There's something missing. So, ladies and gentlemen, I promise you I understand. It is really tough, but just not feeling it doesn't say a thing. It doesn't tell you why you're not feeling it. It doesn't tell you whether you're not feeling it because the shidduch is not a good shidduch, or because you've got some obstacles within your own mind which you're not even aware of and certainly haven't ever done anything to address. So just not feeling it is nothing more than, let me figure this out, not therefore I need to look elsewhere. Okay, just not feeling it when everything else seems right, then just not feeling it means I now need to stop what I'm doing and get to the bottom of it. It may be at the end of the day, you realize there's something bothering you that genuinely is bothering you, that's really legitimate, it's going to affect your life. And you know what? Don't settle for second best. If it's not right, don't do it. But other times you realize that there's one of 50 different things, literally, they could get in your way, maybe very, very small, but enough to just make you feel very uneasy and rob you of your happiness. Don't let that happen. Now I'm just going to look at some of the questions on the chat, the minutes we have left. The host will decide when we stop. How does one know if shidduchim is not working because they are feeling stuck, or just that Hashem decided that it is not the time to get married? You're going to have to speak to a makubal, or somebody who claims to speak in the name of the divine. I can only speak from what I know, which is very much the world of psychology. And I would say that that's not how Hashem works, right? We have to face the person we're dating and ask ourselves, what is going on over here? And I've covered this enough, so I don't want to repeat the point, but suffice it to say that it's not always clear that something is wrong just because you're stuck. It's possible for a person to be stuck for so many different reasons that one should not walk away from an otherwise really solid idea where it looks on paper to be great. This is where you need to, before you walk away, try your best to understand what it is. So does dating someone who is much older than you and has been in the process for 5 years, 5+ years, means that they are not much aware of themselves and need to still work on it and discover more? Can this be a red flag? Absolutely not. If that were the case, nobody would be in the clear. Absolutely not. Not even 1%. No, the lack of self-awareness is across the board. Many people have had, let's say, an unsupported parent, or maybe had a difficult time in school, or maybe they just got an unusual personality they were born with. I mean, it could just be anything. And no, why would you know? Even people I dealt with in the psychological field are often unable to pick up on these things. No blame at all. Nobody's pointing fingers. Nobody's saying you're a bad person because how come you don't realize? No, we just need to be very loving and supportive. And we need to say to people, no offense, we're not trying to in any way insinuate there's something wrong with you, but maybe there's something you don't know. Why would you know unless somebody pointed out to you? Can you give specific examples of things to do to bring on emotional connection? Yes, I can. I'm going to give you my favorite one. You're getting this for free, right? But this is a little trick. I'm sorry if it sounds very devious, but it's brilliant. If you're on date number 3, for example, try to remember something that the person you dated said in date number 1 and say the following, even if it isn't true, I give you permission. Say, you know, on date number 1, you said such and such and such. I thought that was very interesting and I've been thinking about it a lot. Do you mind if I ask you something about it? By doing that, you have shown A, that you paid attention to what they were saying on date number 1. B, you respect and value what they say, that you're thinking about it. And number 3, you're interested in them enough to bring it up again and try to learn more about it. These are just one little tip, it's an unusual one I came up with, of how you can build connection, right? You can build connection at each stage in the dating process. So it's not like I have this ABC stage thing. So you have to think about it as where you're holding in the dating process. So I can't answer this comprehensively without going into detail about where you're holding. But I hope that at least helps. Based off what you mentioned with regards to lack of connection being possibly due to various reasons and not necessarily a reason to say no, when one side doesn't feel like there was a connection, but the other side does, how much is it okay to push? Okay, pushing is not the word I would use, but absolutely, you need to communicate. You need to understand that the person who's on the other side is also clueless and has no idea what they're doing. No disrespect, but why would they know? What have they spent 10 years studying it? So you need to be able to go work through the shadchan or whoever to say, look, there are sometimes reasons why these things happen. Look at it, it's a great shidduch. Think about it, we're very much on the same page. There are a lot of interesting similarities, a lot of good connection going on here, but it seems on the emotional level, it's just not working so well. We should think about how to build that. And people, shadchanim especially, and parents, right? And all of us, to be much more open to the fact that sometimes this needs to be created because it doesn't always come automatically. That's just how it is. I can explain much more at length about why this can happen and so on. But obviously we don't have a whole lot of time. After meeting different people with different personalities, how do you know when it's not working because it's your problem, like the avoidance one, or didn't figure out yet what personality you really want rather than what you think you wanted, to when it's not just the right person? Because sometimes it's just not the right person, but it could also be your problem. Well, 100%, and I don't have a simple answer to that. If I could, it would be brilliant, right? Everybody's different, but that's what you need to be asking. So congratulations on putting the question out so well. That's exactly the question I would hope that you would ask. And that's where you want to be speaking to somebody, that person, maybe yourself, if you feel you can do it yourself. But definitely, this is the kind of question you want to answer. The only basic tip I can give you is any use, because of how individual the answer is normally, is if, as far as any rational person can tell, this makes sense, meaning it really makes sense, then there is a very good chance, and I'm talking about 95% chance, that there's nothing wrong with the shidduch, and it's more about certain issues with people's personalities. And many of those issues are only effective in dating and not in marriage. That's why I started off by saying dating is not marriage, dating is fake. You're trying to create something out of nothing. It works for many people, but it also doesn't work for many other people, right? I have this weird quote I came up with, which is, the definition of dating is a unique form of torture that is made worse by the fact that everybody expects me to enjoy it. And that is basically the problem. Dating is not always easy for people, and not necessarily because the person they're dating is somehow unsuitable or there's something wrong with them. And we just need to get over that, and we will save ourselves a lot of heartache. So I think that means we've run out of time. Rebbetzin Blooming.
Yes. First of all, Dr. Rabbi, will give you all the titles. First of all, thank you so much. There was so much condensed in this 1 hour to unpack and to just reflect on and to chew and to sleep over and to have a long Shabbos to discuss with friends and family. So first of all, thank you so much. I think it'll also be really helpful and insightful if anyone can reach out to you, because you're such a wealth of knowledge and resource, that perhaps if there's any singles that might feel that they can gain some insight during their dating process, before, middle, or after. If you're open for that, if you want to share your best way of communication to you. I don't know if I'm opening a can of worms on that one.
Telepathy is the best way. Just to send out your thoughts, and I will know. Now, people now to get hold of me. America's Most Wanted. There's right there, number 5 of the list.
Perfect.
Now, people get hold of me. It's not hard. I would just emphasize to people that somebody went and spent, my colleague and I, Yudivara Krasniansky, spent thousands of hours creating a huge resource called Date Well. I'm not saying that that's going to solve everything, but it will give you the ability to understand things which you're not going to get from anywhere else. And there's no other website that can do this. I did this because I felt that people need to understand, people need to be able to go to somewhere trustworthy where they can get Torah values oriented insight into what's going on, everything that we discussed here, and many, many, many other topics.
So it's datewell.org, and exactly. You can put that in the chat box as well, datewell.org. You have a wealth of knowledge to be able to tap into and to incorporate in our lives and throughout the process. And if anyone has any further questions, we'll definitely feel free to share your number, your email, so that for the hundreds that you've already been affecting and helping and uplifting, there's hundreds more that are able to use your gift and your talent. So thank you. I really, really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll be able to, get phase 2 and be able to share more of your, pick more of your brain and knowledge that you've been working on years on research. And we're just very honored to have you. So really, thank you so much. And I give a bracha to everyone who has joined, that Hashem should just make the process easy, and it should be, even though against what doctor says that it's not enjoyable, but should be enjoyable. And every person that we date that it didn't go as we expected is one person closer to the bashert. And you should find the bashert at the right time, at the right place, and it should be the Karv Mamish, and we should have the ultimate wedding with Hashem and the Jewish people in Yerushalayim with the coming of Mashiach.
Amen.
So thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Yeah.
Have a good night and good Shabbos.